Good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna get started in just about a minute, so hang in there, stay with us until we get started. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here on Mind Matters. This is another Sunday evening. Welcome to another episode of Mind Matters, where we will be discussing matters of the mind because the mind matters. I'm Alta Marie Elvis, and I want to thank you so much for joining me on this mindset journey. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and if you're watching on YouTube, just hit that bell so you can get a notification each time that I post a new video. Let me see who I have on my Facebook today. Welcome, Casey. Let me see who else. Just type in the chat, let me know where it is that you're joining us from, and hopefully I get to see those, because sometimes I don't see them until later on. All right. Okay, so have you ever been in a situation where you were, so afraid that your fear basically crippled you? I know I have been to the point where I didn't know what to do. I as a leader, sometimes I have to make decisions, or I have to venture into something that's new, and that to me is terrifying. I am terrified of failing. I am terrified of just stepping out into something that I've never done before. But tonight we're going to talk about fear versus faith, and how these two things affect us. And I have with me tonight somebody who I consider a good friend. He's my boss. He's the senior pastor of Freeport Bible Church. Pastor Kyle Maycock, are you there?
I am here.
Hello, Pastor Kyle. Welcome. Good to have you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. All right, so we're just gonna get right into it. We want to look at fear, and fear is something that is a natural part of our lives, but sometimes it gets to the point where it actually affects how we live life and whether or not we actually live life. So what have you seen, where persons have been affected by fear so much? How are some of the ways you see fear affect them?
But I think you hit the nail on the head, and when you started out, I think fear has a paralyzing effect on people. Fear of the unknown. You see people. You see people actually venture into habits, run away from destiny, miss out on opportunities, not grow professionally, not grow spiritually, all because fear has this intimidating, paralyzing effect on people. And so people miss out on the sweet things of life and opportunities, all kinds of opportunities, because of fear, the presence of fear itself.
Yes. People are afraid of so many different things. As I said, I'm afraid of, I listed some of the things that I'm afraid of. But then, people are scared of heights. People are afraid of sickness. They're afraid of insects. They're afraid of being lonely. And Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing that we should fear is fear itself. And fear is pretty much a cycle, because if, as you said, we miss out on so much because if we're fearful, then we're not going to go after that experience. We're going to stop and we're going to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. And then that then, breeds ignorance because
Yep.
you don't know.
Yep.
Fear is just not wanting, not knowing what's going to happen. So you decide, okay, I'm not going to.
Yep.
But if you go ahead and you do it, then you're going to know exactly what's going to happen. And I think that fear of failure is one of the biggest
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I
unknown
think
because if you are afraid of failure, then you're not going to step out of your comfort zone.
never try. You'll never try. And that's that is applicable to every area of your life. Nobody likes to get a zero, right? I don't like to fail. Nobody likes to come up short because sometimes it plays on your self-worth. Sometimes it causes you to doubt your calling, doubt your abilities, and it really isolates, when you fail. You tend to kind of want to take a step back. But but fear is a part of the journey, is a part of the human experience. The unknown, facing the unknown, not being sure of what tomorrow holds, trial and error. All of these things, they breed environments for fear to kind of take control and to overwhelm you. So you're right, paralyzed, being paralyzed by fear, and especially failure is the surest way to fail, actually.
Yeah.
That's the
Because
irony.
go ahead.
I say, yeah, that's the irony of it. Fear of failure, being controlled by a fear of failure, is a sure way to actually fail.
Yeah, because if you actually don't try something, that's the only way you fail because it's either you try it and you didn't get it right and you fix it, or you don't do it at all, which is actually failure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. So in action is one of those effects of fear, not doing, not going after what it is that you want, and it's also um causes us to be divided in our thinking. We're indecisive, and that's something I've had to deal with
Mhm.
as far as dealing with my fear because being in the position that I'm in initially, I wasn't sure whether or not what I was doing was right,
Mhm.
and because of that I made decisions and then I went back on my decision and then I went back again, and that's never good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about a double-minded man.
Stable. Yeah. Shake. Yeah.
Say it again.
Yeah. Double-minded man is unstable and shaky.
Unstable in all his ways, yes. Yeah, so that was me. I was just all over the place, and this affected my staff. It affected the way that I did my job. And so, we have to make sure that when we make a decision, we are certain of what we're doing. And when I say certain, I don't mean you are sure of what the outcome is going to be, because you're never sure of what the outcome is going to be. But you're confident in yourself, so that you're not fearful of making that decision and accepting the outcome of it.
Yeah. One of the things I learned is that um, fear is an emotion, a very powerful emotion, and it's not always the best thing to lead with any kind of emotions or even to be void of emotions, but it has its place. But one of the things I actually realized is that whenever we are in positions of leadership where our decisions affect the livelihood or directions of other people's life, it's a good thing to have a sober mind. It's a good thing to go back over things. But a great asset to leadership is to lead not through emotions, but lead on principle. Because you'll never have all the information you need to make the perfect decision. There are no perfect decisions. And especially when you're leading people, problems are as complex as people. So no
Yeah.
two problems are the same. But if you can establish an organizations, healthy organizations, put a lot of infrastructure in place, put a lot of guidelines in place on how to make decisions, not necessarily what decisions to make, but it gives you a recipe, blueprints on how to make decisions. And any time that you are assessing a situation and you are leading on principles, um, that would help you to make the best decision possible. And you learn that once you lead on principle and you make the best decision possible with the best information possible, with the right intentions, then oftentimes, even if it doesn't go the way you want, you learn to accept. And God has a way of vindicating certain decisions when you prayerfully do it, you carefully do it, and you do it with the right skill set. And that's something that kind of take the emotion, the emotions grip of decision making out of, I mean, fear out of decision making.
Yeah. And you can't please everybody. That's something I've I've learned the hard way. You can't please everybody. Every decision you make, especially in leadership, every decision you make, you're gonna have some persons who are against it and some persons who are for it, and then there's some persons who just don't care what decision you make. So you have to be you can't allow fear to hinder your decision making. Fear also causes us, and I don't know, this session just looks like I'm stepping on my own toes. Because fear causes us to procrastinate, and I think it causes us to procrastinate because we're striving for perfection, and perfection is you hardly find it. And because you want, at least let me speak for me, I want things to be in a certain way at a certain time. I need it to look a certain way. And because of that, I procrastinate with pushing forward. And not fear of failure stops me from doing that as well, because I may have a good idea and everybody says, oh yes, it's a good idea. But in my head, I'm like, oh, I don't know. And you're one of those persons who are always, LVs, just stop it. Just go ahead and get it done. So thank you for that. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for pushing me when I need pushing.
Yeah, and procrastination, of course, like one of the things you said earlier, or people know, is fear is a thief. It's a thief of time, it's a thief of effort, it's a thief of experience. And procrastination definitely will cause you more than you think. But, there's nothing wrong with, and people say being a perfectionist. Sometimes it's not even about being a perfectionist. Again, if you're in a healthy organization, or you run your home like this, or you manage your own life by it, it's always good to operate on principles. And if excellence is a value of an organization that you're leading, if excellence is a language that you have for yourself, that you strive for, yes, you're going to mull, you're going to revisit, check, verify. You want to make sure all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted, and there's nothing wrong with that. But one of the things that you have to do is remember that a decision has to be made. And if you put a timeline on it, sometimes you just have to shoot. Sometimes it comes a time when you just have to do it, even if you do it with your lips trembling or your heart racing. You just have to make a decision, and you could do things afraid. You
Yeah.
could do things afraid, but as you do it, you learn to overcome. Learn to overcome it.
Yeah. And we're gonna get to that part, overcoming the fear. Um, and what we see happening is that fear will continue to develop, as you said, if you don't overcome it, if you don't push past it. If every time you're fearful of something, you go ahead and you say, okay, I'm not going to do this because I'm afraid or because I'm scared, you're never going to get any further. You're staying in your comfort zone. And we all know that growth does not come in your comfort zone. You have to step out of your comfort zone for you to have growth. All right. So some of the things that we see that feed our fear, as I said, indecision, inaction, fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen, but only God knows what's going to happen. We are never certain of anything that happens in our lives. The Bible says that we may have our own plans, but God's plan is ultimate.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes we're fearful too because we feel unworthy. We feel as though, we are not supposed to be the one doing this, or, I'm not good enough for something. And
Mhm.
because you feel that way, or we feel that way, then we shy away from doing certain things. Oh, I'm not a good speaker, but yet, you know, you're here, or I'm here doing a live, but then ask me to go on the stage, and I may tell you I'm not a good speaker, because, or I may say somebody else can do it better than I can. So we feel unworthy of.
Yeah, that's interesting because, and you would be surprised. I mean, you're talking about it, but you'd be surprised how many people are struggling with the same thing, or wrestle with the same thing, or face the same thing on a daily basis. And so this a real issue, and it transcends every area, whether it be parenting, because you have some parents who parent with fear in their hearts. You have spouses who love with fear in their hearts. You have um, organizational leaders who lead from a position of fear. That's the kind of stuff you'd be surprised how many people this issue of fear really, really touches. And so that's something that's you're talking about it. And just the fact that you are overcoming your fear to do something like this could bring light to people's life.
Yeah, my first my first episode, I was, I don't know, I started the whole live and was like 10 minutes in, I think 7 minutes in, without turning my mic on.
What?
I went, and that was all because of fear, because I had it planned for quite some time, and I'm like, so I kept putting it off, because I'm like, so many people out there doing lives and whatever, and I'm not going to, maybe nobody's gonna watch, or nobody might care, and the first episode I did, I went on there, and 7 minutes just talking away, and nobody could have heard a thing I said. So
Save that. Let me make sure I write that down. That's something to remember when it blows up, as it blows. But the truth is, like, people, well, some people closest to me know this, that I'm extremely bashful, even sometimes shy, and I am deathly afraid of public speaking.
you.
I am deathly afraid of public people. Like, every time on the pulpit, whatever I'm doing, you see me sweating. That's nerves. Every time before I preach, before I speak, before I come on a Zoom meeting,
Wow.
I am deathly, I'm talking morbidly afraid. I kid you, every single time, every time. I can never get used to it. I can never get used to an environment, no matter how much I do it. So I wrestled with this thing too. So that's something that people close to me know. Uh,
Okay. And now everybody knows.
everybody, everybody knows.
Because I didn't know. I could have never told, because I know from talking to you, you're constantly doing speaking engagements. So, it's,
You gotta live.
I would have never knew that you were afraid. And then you're a pastor, senior pastor of a church. You speak every Sunday.
But that's just sometimes God called you out your comfort zone.
Yes.
I had my
And
way.
and and
I would sit down and write books and keep quiet.
and that's something, we have to, as I say, move away from the fear, fight the fear, because you never know what it is that you can accomplish when you step out of your comfort zone, when you do not feed that fear, you starve that fear.
Mhm.
Me doing this, I get more comfortable each week, but I'm still nervous before I come on, especially when I have a guest on. I'm wondering, okay, is it gonna flow? But at the end of the day, as I said, we have to step out of our comfort zone in order for us to grow. All right, so we also are fearful because of negativity. Sometimes we have negative people around us that feed into us the wrong things. Or you can't do this, or you shouldn't do this, or people are going to think this way about you. And this negativity causes fear. Have you ever experienced that, or known anybody know anybody who has experienced that, or can you shed some light on that for us?
Absolutely. Actually, psychologists say that children who live with criticism, constant criticism, usually grow up abnormally shy. And so you have people who are extremely unhealthy, abnormally shy because of growing up with criticisms. And there are people who, we live in a, we live in social media where everybody, people that throw a rock at you for anything, people that put you on blast for anything, they feel empowered by using their global platform or whatever to bring you down. And we've all witnessed the jars and the snarls and the words of the destructive words that people put out there, and we watch people devour other people, and we are deathly afraid of that because I remember when I went through it. I remember when I went through it to the point where I was like, half of these people don't even know me, but I'm to the point where I just had to tell my family, I said, just stay off Facebook. Those people don't know what they're talking about, and I'm not correcting anybody. But it's almost like you don't want to be criticized. Fear of criticism could cause you to not step out, but it comes with the territory.
Mhm.
Comes with territory.
It comes with growth. And criticism is not always bad. But when persons are constantly negative, and you want to move yourself away from that. I was at a point before where I just turned all my social media off. I just did not go on Facebook, just because of what I was seeing and all of that. And I'm like, something, if it's going to affect my peace, I'm not going to go there. So we have to be mindful of and be vigilant of persons who are feeding us negativity, especially negativity that will cause us fear and negativity that is going to cause us to doubt ourselves.
Yep, yep, and that's
um when I was growing up, I guess, as I said, everything tonight seems to be stepping on my own toes. When I was growing up, I was constantly compared to my sister. Love my sister to death, love my parents to death, but I was constantly compared to her. She is, extremely, I'm smart, but she's extremely smart. And being the older girl, I think for me, I did most of the housework and all of that. And that kind of affected my schoolwork to some extent, not drastically, but to the point where she had more time, even though she didn't have to study and all of that stuff. But I was constantly compared. Okay, why is it that you can't get all A's, or she is first in her class and you're, I think I was like 20, 40, 43 out of 47 or something to that effect. Still had a good average.
yeah,
But because I was in the smartest class, getting an 80, I think I was getting like an 80 average, and I was like 40 something in my class.
yeah.
And so they weren't looking at, you know,
Like you will
she has a
learn.
good average. You're
Just
looking at, oh, you almost last in your class. And so because of that, I think I became withdrawn because I was constantly compared. And anybody who knows me knows I don't speak. I stay to myself unless I have to step out of my shell, or step out, but I believe that's where it came from. How you're talking about, children who are constantly um compared when they're younger. And then also, sometimes we have persons in the schools who are adults who tell children, and this is something that I'm passionate about, who tell children that they won't amount to anything. And you don't want to do that.
yeah.
And that is negativity being poured into children that are barely even, they haven't even made a decision as to what they're going to do in life.
Words matter. Words.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, they do.
And
And so, with fear, the Bible tells us in Philippians 4, verse 6, it says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be known unto God. So there is no need for fear. It's there, but there's no need for it. And as humans, it's going to be there. It's going to constantly be there. But when you see that fear set in, then something should take over. What is it that that it is that should take over? Faith. And Pastor Kyle, I listened to your sermon today, and that's something you spoke about today. Faith. You just tell the people what faith is.
Well, I always paraphrase it because we know in scriptural terms, it's defined. But I always see faith as an actionable trust in God. Like we let people know that anything we do as a reflection of our belief, trust, dependence on God. That is what the faith looks like. And the truth of the matter is, fear in its right place could be useful. It could actually be useful because one of the things that we talked about this morning was that I think it was in Luke 17, the first few verses in chapter 17. Jesus was giving his disciples something hard to do. He was telling them about forgiving people who harmed you over and over and over again. And nobody likes that kind of stuff, you
No.
know. I could give you a pass once, even in baseball, 3 strikes you out. But Jesus kept saying that if someone sins against you 7 times a day for 7 days straight, if they come back and repent, you should forgive them. And that's a hard thing. And he was saying that that takes faith. And then in verse 5, the disciples kind of thinking about that, they turned and they said, well, you're gonna have to increase our faith. If you want us to do something like that, you gotta give us a little bit more faith to do it, to depend on you to do it. And then Jesus in verse 6 said, good, good, because even if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can do anything. And so fear, the the more intimidating the thing is, the more it should provoke us to put our faith or to cry out to God, to ask God to give us what's lacking in our life. So fear um, should not just replace faith, but it should really stand on faith. On faith, faith should really stand on fear's head, really just kind of stand on it. And so that's really the role that faith should begin to play in response to certain fears that we face in our life.
Yes, most definitely. And, you know, just want to put this out there that fear and faith basically are the same thing. If you look at it, it's just that both of them require us to trust in the unknown or to believe in the unknown. It's just that fear is the negative part, and it takes you to a negative place, and faith takes you to a positive place. So when you're fearful, you're fearful because you don't know what's going to happen. But when you're faithful, it does the same thing. You're not sure what's going to happen. It's just that now you're putting your trust in someone that holds you, who is bigger than you,
Yep.
you
You know,
know. So
it's so crazy.
go ahead.
So crazy because they used to tell us that if you pray for patience, you know what God gives you? God gives you problems.
Yes.
If you pray for faith, God will put you in front of a lot of intimidating things, a lot of things that are fair worthy, a lot of unknowns. But that's what it takes to cultivate faith in life. So fear sometimes could be a tool that God uses to really, really develop us in our journey of faith.
Yeah. So conquering fear and moving towards faith, this requires the right mindset. And we're on mind matters. It requires the right mindset. And in order to have this right mindset, then we have to um, allow certain things to fuel us. So when we are trying to get the right mindset, which is a faith mindset. Faith mindset requires us to depend on God. It's God dependent. But then the fear requires it's depending on self. And when we start to depend on self, we're gonna get ourselves in plenty trouble because we are only so much.
Yep.
But then, when we are, as I said, dependent on God, it can take us to a whole another level. There you'll be able to accomplish things that you wouldn't even think that you would be able to accomplish. You'll be able to surpass the fear of whatever it is that yourself has, the boundaries that the fear you have have set on you.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the ways that we can feed this fear, this faith, so that our faith can grow to overcome fear?
Well, one, the Bible tells us that we should walk by faith and not, or live by faith. And the accurate translation is to live by faith and not by sight. And one of the things that we can make up in our minds right away is that sometimes there's more to life than what we see with our eyes. That what we see with our eyes or what we see right in front of us is not the whole story. That a lot of times God is working behind the scenes. Sometimes we can't see beyond whatever obstacle is in front of us. But if we develop the mindset, one, that God is at work in us to do his will, that if we are in the center of his will, we need not necessarily become overwhelmed or become paralyzed by what's looking us in the face because God has an agenda. In the story of David and Goliath, it's so interesting how the Bible describes Goliath as almost 9 feet tall, with a javelin, with a shield. And what I find interesting is that the scripture calls Goliath a champion, meaning that he's a winner. That the Goliath was one warrior that caught bodies on bodies. He made a living on conquering people, and that's who was screaming at Israel for 40 days and 40 nights, just really taking their nerve. But David, his mind was not intimidated. His mindset wasn't on the size of Goliath, but his mind was fixated on what God was doing, who God was. And that's why he was able to talk back to this giant that was in front of him, not in his ability, but saying, well, who this do this? Who is this guy? Like, I mean, what's up? Like, I mean, yeah, he's big,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he's strong, but David saw beyond sight, and he was able to not see, not with his eyes, but saw through his eyes, the sight that God gave him, spiritual insight.
Yes, and that's I didn't even think of that story while preparing for today. But then, you know, when a boy can go to war and see a giant and be able to conquer that giant, we can do the same thing with Christ, with faith,
Mhm.
because there's so many giants in our lives as far as the fears that we have. And with Christ and with faith, we're able to conquer those giants, and we're able to step out of our comfort zones and accomplish what it is that we think we cannot do, or other people may think we cannot do. Because persons, when they saw David, they were like, boy, you better stop it.
And
you know
they were only looking with their naked eye.
Right.
You it'll fool you. It'll
Yeah.
fool.
And one of the stories that came to me is Esther, and Esther having to, go in to see the king. That took fear, because when Mordecai first sent the message to her, she's like, well, who's gonna do that? And Mordecai say, you need to do that. And she's like, no, 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 not me. If I go into the king, he may kill me. And
Yep.
then it got to the point where she realized that God was using her for something. And she was placed in the position that she was placed in for a specific reason. And
Yep.
when she realized that, it's God who was ultimately had the ultimate say in her life, she's like, okay, if I live, I live. If I die, I die. I'm going to go in and do this.
Yeah.
And she went in, and, we all know the story. She was able to go in and save her people.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times we fear because we don't know. But then, as I said, we have to have that faith in God that He knows what's best for us. He's never going to lead us down a path that is contrary to where He wants us. And
Some
so, if go ahead.
sometimes what I think is a real issue is we doubt whether or not we are in the center of God's will. Sometimes there may be things lingering in our life or that we think God trying to get us. We think that opposition is punishment. That sometimes we believe that. And so our fears are not necessarily tied to God's ability. It's really tied to whether or not what, really not sure what God is doing and how it's going to affect us emotionally, how it's going to affect us spiritually. Well, not spiritually, but how it's going to affect us physically, financially, all of these psychologically, because nobody wants to go through challenges. Nobody want to
Yeah.
fight. Nobody want, like, we are not interested in that. Honor me and grandfather me into heaven, grandfather me into to success. I don't necessarily want to go through some of those things. But we have an enemy who reminds us that we are inadequate, who reminds us that we are human, who reminds us that as long as we are on this side of eternity and this side of time, that you're going to always be wrestling, walking in and out, stumbling in and out of God's perfect will for your life. And he's saying, ha, this is happening because you are outside of God's will. And then we believe it. And so that
Mhm.
causes a lot of fear, that causes a lot of doubt, that causes a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of confidence in God is diminished because we are thinking, like you said, we are thinking about our own righteousness, our own strength. So that's one of the vices that we have to be careful about and guard our minds against when it comes to this area.
Yeah. And do not avoid fear. We are not supposed to avoid it.
Mhm.
Fear is a natural part of life. We have to overcome it, not avoid it. So we have to, and I'm speaking to myself. Do not avoid fear, overcome it. Um, Pastor Kai, can fear and faith dwell in the same place? Can we have fear and faith and be able to function?
It's strange because sometimes if you look at the scriptures, it says that perfect love casts out all fear. The scripture also tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. But sometimes it is the presence of fear that causes us to draw on our faith or our faith to grow. For example, if we find ourselves in overwhelming circumstances where we are afraid for our life, what do? We pray. We pray to God when we are fearful about certain things, some about failing an exam. We work towards, so the presence of fear sometimes, like I said, could be a catalyst for faith. But you can't be fearful and faithful at the same time. And you said it right. Fear is not to be avoided, it's to be overcome and to be conquered. And so they can't dwell simultaneously. You can't, they don't work together for the same thing. One is trying to stop you, the other is trying to start you. Sometimes fear of God's judgment is healthy. Sometimes there's some things there's some guardrails in our life, some things we
Mhm.
do because of fear, and that's healthy fear. So fear in itself is not negative. Fear in itself is not necessarily bad, but the end result of what it's pointing you to, or what the end result is usually determines what kind, if it's unhealthy fear or healthy fear. And so you see the presence of both, um, maybe not working simultaneously, but they do coexist in a strange way.
Yes, and you basically answered the next question I was gonna ask you, which is is fear always bad? Is fear always a bad thing? But you answered that question. No, definitely not. Sometimes fear is what propels us forward.
Bro,
Sometimes.
the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Listen, we have men and police officers that tell you, like, people who don't fear the law, they're monsters. They're monsters. Like, I don't fear police because I'm not a criminal. But people who fear the law, like, have no regard for the law. Sometimes you need a healthy fear of punishment and consequence. We've all been around young people, young men who just, I mean, these guys are wild. And they're wild and they're reckless and they're dangerous because they have not an ounce of fear of consequences or justice or God in their life, and it just wreaks havoc on everybody else. So that absence of fear could be dangerous.
Most definitely. So fear is not totally bad. All right, it's not all bad. And so without fear, then for me, I think when I feel fear, as you said, it depends on the situation. Because if it is something where I'm fearful of maybe being caught or fearful of getting in trouble, then I know that fear is warranted. you know but if it is fear because of self-doubt, then that is not good fear to have. All right. So any final words, Pastor Kyle, before we close off? Because I'm over by 10 minutes. Usually I'm a half an hour. But we had to get the information out there. So any final words before I
Yeah, well, I mean,
sign out?
what I would say to people is that, the more you grow in your faith, the more you seek God's will for your life, the more you will find yourself coming face to face with your own fears. But also, the more you lean on God, you'll find that you are getting the courage to do God's will for your life. And anytime that you are convinced that God has given you something to do, just do it, even if your mouth is trembling. He told Jeremiah, when he called Jeremiah, he said, Jeremiah, don't watch people's faces, because if you are terrified of them, I will terrify you. You see? And so of all the fears in our life, the fear of not living in the center of God's will must trump everything we do. And that will drive us towards, being faithful.
Thank you so much. So when we feel fear but act anyway, we are starving that fear. When we feel fear and we're able to push past it and use our faith in God to overcome that fear, then more than likely that fear will either diminish, it will be less the next time this situation comes up, or it will be totally gone. So, we have to have faith in God to help us through the situations that we're going through, to help us to have that confidence in ourselves that whatever He has placed on us to do, that we are able to do it. So thank you so much, Pastor Kyle, for joining me tonight. Truly appreciate it. Um, and I think I'm going to continue with this topic next week, because there are there are some things that I want to get across, but as I said, my time has basically expired, and I don't want to keep you long because I realize you're still in your office and you need to get home. I know you had a long day, so thank you so much. And remember to overcome fear with faith.
Could I
Push
recommend a,
past. Go
could I,
ahead.
could I recommend a book? There's
Sure.
a book called Fail, which really helped me with my fears. It's a book by Max Lucado called Fearless. Is one of the best books I've ever read. He's a great writer, very easy read. Max Lucado, Fearless. I mean, the poem at the chapter one, that's just definitely one of the greatest books I've ever read.
Okay, awesome. I hope everybody got that. I think I'm gonna have to get that in writing. You probably just send me a text or something, type in the chat, so that we can have persons who want to get that book go ahead and do that. Everyone, thank you so much for viewing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Pastor Kyle. And I will see you next week for another episode of Mind Matters as we continue on this mindset journey. Remember, enjoy your week, and may God continue to bless each and every one of you and your families.